This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Kicking off this Tuesday's programming is K-State Crop Production Specialist Lucas Haag. He joins us to preview the upcoming Cover Your Acres Winter Conference, taking place on January 17th and 18th in Oberlin, Kansas. Year 20 of this event will include some familiar K-State experts, such as Lucas himself, Sarah Lancaster, Romulo Lollato, and Dan O'Brien. Also ahead, the K-State Veterinary Diagnostic Lab puts together a yearly review on the top-known causes of abortion in cattle in Kansas. And K-State veterinarian Gregg Hanzlicek joins us to discuss the top 3 causes for 2022. We end with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk discussing barn fire safety and the importance of having a plan to protect dairy employees and animals alike. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. I am joined now by K-State Crop Production Specialist Lucas Haag. He's going to be joining me to have a conversation previewing an upcoming event that you're not going to want to miss out on. So, Lucas, first and foremost, thanks for joining me.
You bet. Good to be here, Samantha.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be talking with you. You're a hard person to track down, but it's because you stay so busy putting together events like this very often for those that are K-State stakeholders. So the event we're talking about today is the Cover Your Acres Winter Conference. And you were telling me before we went on air that this is the 20th anniversary of this event.
Yeah, we're pretty excited and proud of that. And, I think certainly we've had a lot of good industry partners over the years. We couldn't do it without their sponsorship. And really, the overall goal of this conference has always been to provide producers an opportunity to get locally relevant data, and it's data that's backed by research. And so those are 2 things that are really important to us and I think set us apart from a lot of the other conferences that are held, and that's locally relevant and research backed. That's our goal and our mission as we're putting together the topics and speakers every year.
Absolutely. And this year, of course, I'm sure as other years, you guys have a lot of familiar voices for Ag Today listeners that are going to be speaking. So let's talk through some of these familiar faces or voices that listeners will be able to hear from at this conference.
You bet.
So first and foremost, I see on here that you have Romulo Lollato, of course. He's going to be speaking on the wheat side of things. So especially exciting there, some relevant information for those that attend, right?
Yeah, especially where we're at conditions-wise right now. We had a lot of wheat, had a good stand going into winter. We had wheat that maybe had too good of a stand and started going backwards. And then we got wheat that hasn't even germinated yet. And so that's what we've asked Romulo to do is kind of step through, what is the potential out there and how do we manage this wheat coming out of winter to try and take the best advantage of however many of the 9 lives we got left in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, a tumultuous year for wheat for sure. And still to tell how this crop ends up for 2023 when it comes to harvest. But of course, someone else that we're familiar with hearing from here on Ag Today is Sarah Lancaster. And she's going to be talking about specifically weed management plans for the new year.
Yeah, so, Sarah's been a mainstay of the program since she got to K-State, and it's always a great opportunity to see the latest in the efficacy trials that she conducts. We get some updates on what new products are out there or major label changes. But then, I think the most valuable thing is always try and talk strategy, with our producers. And so be that, how do we use an effective pre-program? What's the value of overlapping residuals? It's really that strategy piece that hopefully we help folks, kind of wrap their minds around and start making a plan for this year.
Absolutely. And you mentioned strategy there. A great way for me to segue into what you'll be talking about at this event. It's nutrient management strategies. So can you speak to the significance of that, especially as we think about the current conditions that we're going into in 2023?
Yes, we've got a lot of moving pieces. The last couple of years, Dorvar and I have spent a lot of time talking about the economics of fertilizer and fertility management. And, we've seen that ease a little bit, but we're still, 70, 80 cent a pound nitrogen. We're still looking at the economics piece of this, but we also got to take into consideration, how dry we are. I mean, if we stay dry through this winter and don't have much in the way of profile water at planting time, what are our realistic yield goals and how should we be adjusting our nutrient management strategies as part of that? And then that also kind of ties into the other talk I'm doing, and that is looking at what are our options for crop rotation We've got a lot of acres. We're going to have to decide on the dryland side, do we fallow it? Do we plant it back to something? And so we're going to use we're really fortunate to have a lot of long-term rotation data from our Tribune station. And so we're going to take some of that and put economics to it and kind of see, what are our options given the current environment.
Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful, and I'm sure an opportunity that listeners aren't going to want to miss out on. And I also see here listed on kind of the layout that you guys have for the conference, there's going to be an opportunity to view some exhibits. So what will that look like?
Yeah, so we got a trade show that goes along with the conference, and again, back to really supportive businesses that have been with us a long time, and so we've got anchored by some of our platinum sponsors, so a number of machinery of implement dealerships kind of anchor that for us, and then we also have a wide variety. All the major chemical companies are represented, seed, financing, really, the whole breadth of agribusiness will be present there. And it's a great opportunity for a lot of our sponsors and our attendees. It's, these people are, it's strengthening existing relationships. And again, that opportunity to, you think about something new or hear something new in one of the sessions, you've got that opportunity to go out and, talk to your business partner and say, hey, how do we implement this? Can we get this product or can we change this strategy? And it seems to be a real nice mix.
Absolutely. And those opportunities to network of sorts with other producers in the area and then other industry stakeholders as well is really the highlight of these sort of conferences, is it not?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of learning and a lot of conversations that happen at the lunch tables, which we serve a really great lunch for everyone. And, we get attendees that, come from as far south as the Oklahoma Panhandle, Garden City, and as far north as, Ogallala, North Platte, Nebraska to the north. So we cover a pretty wide swath, which is a lot of fun. You get to hear a lot of different experiences and visit with a lot of different people.
Absolutely. Well, once again, Lucas, this Cover Your Acres Winter Conference is going to be held January 17th and 18th this year, and it's going to be in Oberlin, Kansas, which I understand is where this event is always held. So looking forward to having some people interested in, looking for more information potentially on attending this. So if people are looking to register, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so all the information, the full schedule is online, and so it's 2 days, but it's the same program. We've got a full program each day. And so a lot of people, you can come for just 1 day, or if you want to hit every single program, you can come for 2, and we've got some people that do that. But all that information is online. They can go to www.northwest.ksu.edu/coveryouracres, and all the full schedule and the online registration, more details on the sessions and our speakers, it's all on the webpage.
And I will link to that in the show notes of today's program as well. If you don't have a pen and pencil to jot that down real quick, we'll link to that, which can be found on agtoday.net as always. But Lucas, thank you so much for your time today. I know if anybody out there is tuning in, if they're not convinced to go already, I don't know why, but if you could tell someone why they really should attend this year, what would be your message to them?
Well, I think it's again, we're aware of a lot of the challenges, decisions people are having to make, and I think you'd be hard-pressed not to come away with something that can be have a positive effect on your management and your bottom line this year.
Absolutely. Well, Lucas, thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to potentially seeing you at the Cover Your Acres Winter Conference.
You bet, Samantha.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Lucas Haag. He is our K-State Crop Production Specialist, giving us information on the upcoming Cover Your Acres Winter Conference. Again, the 20th anniversary of this huge event that will be taking place January 17th and 18th in Oberlin, Kansas. More information on registration can be found on our website, which is agtoday.net, listed in the show notes of today's program. Another KSRE program, which is quickly approaching, are the 2023 Kansas Corn Schools. Those will begin January 12th in Oakley, Kansas, continuing on January 13th in Salina, January 19th in Mayetta, and January 20th in Parsons. This program will also have an online virtual component this year, which will occur February 2nd. Again, you can expect to hear from some familiar faces and voices at these events. Ignacio Ciampiti, our Farming Systems Extension Specialist here at K-State, will also be in attendance. If you're interested in learning more about this event, you can feel free to check it out and learn more at kscorn.com/cornschools. Again, that is kscorn.com/cornschools. Before we cut to a short break here shortly, K-State Research and Extension is asking for your help. Those of us that work for K-State Research and Extension do our best every day to ensure that you, our stakeholders, are getting the most relevant and timely information possible. That's the job we've been filling for nearly 108 years now, ever since K-State Research and Extension was brought into existence. And we don't take that job lightly. Because of this, we have recently released a public survey asking about the current and potential future needs of those we care about most, Kansans. So, if you are a Kansan that is over the age of 18 and has used, currently uses, or hopes to use K-State Research and Extension programming, hint, hint, if you're listening to this show now, you are one, do us a favor and complete the survey. The results will help our dedicated extension specialists, agents, and researchers provide you with the information and assistance that best meets your needs as KSRE program users. So if you are interested in completing the survey, it'll be a huge help to all of us here at K-State Research and Extension. A link will be posted in the show notes of today's program, which, as always, can be found on agtoday.net. The survey is readily available in both English and Spanish. Now we're cutting to a short break, but when we return, we will be joined by K-State Veterinarian out of the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, Gregg Hanzlicek, for a conversation on the 3 biggest causes of abortion in cattle in 2022. It's an interesting conversation that you're not going to want to miss out on, and it's followed up, of course, by this week's edition of Milk Lines, during which our K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk will be sharing some fire safety tips, especially when it comes to protecting both dairy cattle and dairy workers alike. So definitely some important information that's coming ahead. We'll be back with all of that and more ahead on Agriculture Today. Today, we are joined now by K-State Veterinarian from the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, Gregg Hanzlicek. So, Gregg, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. So, we're going to talk through the most common causes of abortion that the diagnostic lab saw in the last year, which is kind of a crazy, interesting topic to be thinking about because technology's come so far that we now do have the ability to diagnose some of these things.
We do, and we do this in the lab every year. We just look at what happened in 2022, and it just so happened this week or last week we finished summarizing the major things that we find that are causing abortions in the Midwest.
We were chatting beforehand, and you told me it's interesting to see how this data changes year to year because there are some pretty drastic changes in terms of the top 3 or 4 causes that we see.
Yeah, last year it was BVD was by far the number one thing. This year it's IBR, and it's kind of a surprise. We've seen IBR as the top of the list in the past few years, but by a large margin, IBR was the most common thing that we diagnosed that caused abortion in beef calves this year, 2022.
Wow. Well, if listeners are tuning in and they're not familiar with IBR, maybe a good starting place for that is to explain what that is.
Well, IBR is a virus, and it's associated with bovine respiratory disease, but it's also a reproductive disease. And that's why we vaccinate cows against it, is not so much for the respiratory side, but more for the reproductive side. A lot of times, and unfortunately in these cases, the IBR that is causing the abortion actually comes from a vaccine. And that's why we think that we're seeing an increased trend of it over the years, is the use of modified live vaccines in cows that have not been vaccinated or previously vaccinated in the previous 12 months. When we use those modified live IBRs, that has a negative effect on the fetus.
Some label changes have allowed for modified lives to be given to pregnant animals, but just that unknown history is kind of what obviously throws some producers for a loop. If they've purchased animals, we were talking about a case earlier where they purchased some animals and didn't know their history, and it led to a lot of abortions.
Absolutely. There's 4 or 5 vaccines out there that are labeled to use in pregnant cows, and it's safe, but those cows had to have had the same product within the previous 12 years. And the case we were talking about just came in today, and we'll find out if it's actually true, but this person bought 39 cows unknown vaccination history. He always gives his pregnant cows a modified live vaccine at this time of year. So he ran everybody through, gave them modified live. That was last week. And now today at 10 abortions, and it's probably going to have more. And it's all out of those cows where the unknown vaccination history. So The neat thing about the diagnostic lab, I think we're one of the few diagnostic lab that can do this, but they're going to submit some of the aborted fetuses. And if we find IBR, we can gene type it, and we can tell the producer and the veterinarian and say, this is vaccine virus, or we can say, it's not vaccine virus, this is a field exposure. And it's really good to know which source it's coming from.
Absolutely, yeah, because if it wasn't the vaccine that caused it, maybe now his other animals are at risk in that same herd?
Absolutely. So we know we have carriers probably in every herd, but yeah, something initiated an IBR outbreak. So it's important to know vaccine or not vaccine, but just highly recommend that if producers are using modified live or want on their pregnant cows, that they use their veterinarian's advice on what products, and then the timing is really, really important.
Absolutely. And what a resource the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab is in, and that they can test for those things. Such a cool example of how far technology has come. Yeah,
it's amazing. And we got all the vaccines in, and we, like I said, we genotyped the strains of IBR and all the vaccines. We can do it for BVD and a bunch of other things too. And then we just compare our catalog to what we find in the fetus, and we can say this is vaccine or it's not vaccine.
Wow. Mind blown. That's pretty impressive. So moving on from IBR-caused abortions onto our second one, that's nitrates, which, in the grand scheme of things, not a huge surprise, being that the drought probably exacerbated a lot of this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do see nitrate abortions every year, but to have it that high is unusual. But like you said, anytime that we have a drought situation and people are harvesting and feeding forages we don't normally do, or the conditions are such that we have nitrate accumulating in the forages, it's not all that surprising. I agree with you.
I think what leads to this a lot of times is just forages going untested, like you mentioned. It's just that unknown factor. So just a testament to why it's so important to be testing forages when you can.
Absolutely. Highly recommend that anybody that's feeding a nitrate accumulator, so that's your dryland corn, your sorghum sedans, some of your millets. I see, driving around the state, I see people mowing and raking and baling in places where they haven't for a long, long time. And so there's the opportunity even baling up some Johnson grass into those bales, which is a huge nitrate accumulator. But the one thing that we don't talk enough about is oat. Oat hay and oat straw are big-time nitrate accumulators. So if you're feeding any of those kind of products, highly recommend that you sample them and have a nitrate test done on them.
Way worth the investment and the time spent as opposed to the alternative, which obviously a lot of producers saw this year.
Absolutely. The reason we know it's nitrate in the fetuses is the cows don't show any signs of toxicity, but there's a level in there that is causing an oxygen issue with the calves. And actually what we test is the ocular fluid, the eye fluid in the calf. And that's where the nitrate accumulates, and we can tell from that fluid whether this calf has succumbed because of nitrates or not. But again, it's rare for us to see cases where the cows show signs, but it's definitely affecting those fetuses.
Good to know for sure. And this third one was, I learned something new, obviously. I learned something new all the time from our conversations. But this third one, when it comes to molds and fungi, it can come from anything pretty much that's being fed, right? But there's also an opportunity for these animals to inhale it and get it, in their system that way?
Absolutely. So it's everywhere. But when we think of molds, well, we think the cow consumes it through the hay or the silage or whatever. But really, most of the infections occur because they inhale it, and then it gets into their lungs, and then it goes what we call systemic, which just means it gets in the blood system, and then it goes into the fetus and causes some major issues. So it can be both ingestion, but most of it's inhaled.
So when it comes to avoiding molds, like you said, sometimes it's not avoidable in some cases, but when it comes to doing your best to do so, what are some best practices there?
Well, if at all possible, if you've got bales of hay that have that white mold where you're unrolling them or putting them through the processor and you see that dust, I know it's not always possible, but if at all possible, try to use those bales on young stock. Try to stay away from anything that's moldy going into pregnant cows, whether it's silage or whether it's hay or anything. That's probably the best thing you can do. You're never going to prevent all mold in none of our feedstuffs. One of the biggest cases we ever had was a producer that brought in multiple tons of range cubes, or what we called cake, and housed it in a facility where moisture got to it. And that cake became moldy, and then when he fed it to his pregnant heifers, there was a major, major abortion storm. So it can be in products that you purchase if they're not stored correctly also.
You know, these are cases that we want to avoid as much as possible, and we want to have reasons as to why, right? That's why we send, samples off to the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab to see if there is a reason, but only 30% of these end up with a definitive reason as to why they happened. So those other 70%, Greg, what do we do in those cases?
Yeah, you didn't need to rub that in.
No, I mean, it's great that we can still test.
Well, it's very frustrating, whether it's our laboratory or the other laboratories across the United States that monitor this. From year to year, it's about 30% of the time where we can say we know exactly what caused this abortion. And it is frustrating for everybody, including the pathologists, the veterinarians, and the producers. But if there is an abortion storm, one of the things is call the veterinarian, because there are specific samples, in particular the placenta, which are extremely valuable to help us find a diagnosis. And a lot of times we don't have a diagnosis because the organism's gone. It came in and did its damage, and now the IBR's left. Sometimes it's just such a quick disease thing that there's nothing in the tissues that we look at that recognize it as a disease. And so there's a whole bunch of reasons why we can't always find what the cause of the abortion is. And then in a typical year when we have an abortion storm, it's rare that we're thinking about how we're going to prevent it this year. But we need to know so that we can try to prevent it the next year and the next year and the next year. So that's really the goal.
Like we mentioned, some of these things can't be fully, eradicated from concern. They're just things that happen naturally. But if that list changes because it's those things that we just can't get rid of, I think that's for the best, right? As opposed to some of the preventable things being at the top of the list.
Absolutely. The more we know and the more, what's going on, we can change our management and to hopefully prevent things from going on. We're always going to have abortions. Not every herd's going to have abortions every year, but the industry is going to have abortions every year, and it's just really a matter of keeping it at a minimal level that's not going to hurt the producer too much.
Absolutely. And if a producer's tuning in and he's had an issue lately where he's seeing some, untimely cases of this and they're looking for some answers, how can they get in contact with you guys at the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab?
Well, you can just 866-512-5650 is our telephone number, and just ask for me or whoever. Call their veterinarian. Have their local veterinarian is really the best source, and we usually work with veterinarians and not producers, but we're happy to take phone calls from ranchers or cow-calf operators across the Midwest.
Wonderful. Well, Greg, I can't thank you enough for your insight and for your time today. It's always a fun conversation. I'm biased, but I enjoy these conversations a lot. So thank you again so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Gregg Hanzlicek. He's a K-State veterinarian out of the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab here at K-State, joining us for a conversation on the top abortion causes for 2022. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. While we never expect a fire to occur, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says they can happen, and that dairy farmers should have a fire plan in place.
Today I'd like to talk to our Kansas dairy farmers about something that I hope never happens on your farm, a barn fire. And what I want you to think about is, what is your plan? As we think about barn fires and the causes of barn fires, the first part of that plan should be prevention. So as we look at the things that might cause a barn fire, one of the common things used to be feed, particularly hay that was put up a little too wet. As we've changed how we store hay and moved it to buildings other than where we house animals, the chances of that impacting our animals or milking parlor have really been drastically reduced. So today, when we think about the things we might need to be concerned about, as we look at common things that cause barn fires today, a lot of times it's associated with wiring. We keep adding things to our barns, new technology and other things, and sometimes that electrical grid is 50 years old or maybe older. So we get into some overload situations, and there's maybe some circuit breakers on your farm that trip every once in a while. Well, that tripping is probably associated with the fact that we're trying to draw a little too much current through those wires. So get with your electrician. If you have circuit breakers that trip or fuses that blow. Some of you probably still have fuses in some of those circuit boxes. On a regular basis, get an electrician out, get it checked out, figured out what you need to do to prevent that from happening. Keeping in mind that simply trying to increase the size of the fuse or changing to a larger breaker does not protect the wires. Breakers and fuses are designed to protect the wires. We have wires that heat up because they're overloaded. There's a chance of a barn fire. Secondly, as you think about a fire on your farm or the potential for a fire, what is your plan? How are you going to fight that? What are employees going to do? You know, it can be utter chaos if something like this actually happens. And obviously you have several things that you're trying to do all at the same time to protect your animals and also to protect people that might be working on the farm. So having a plan is really, really important. Part of that plan might be, number one, do you have fire extinguishers and do people know where those fire extinguishers are? You know, a lot of barn fires actually started out fairly small, and sometimes a $30 fire extinguisher could have been utilized to stop that from growing any larger. Also training so people know how to actually use a fire extinguisher. There are right ways and wrong ways to do that, so training is very, very important. And then finally, remember that you do need to have an annual inspection to make sure that those fire extinguishers are functioning properly. Now, let's talk about the plan a little bit. You know, it may not hurt to have a meeting with your local fire department. Many of you probably depend upon rural fire departments for protection. It could take them a while to get to your farm. Also keep in mind that in many cases it's going to take help from additional fire departments to cover a barn fire. It takes a long time and a lot of water. So how can you help the fire department out? The meeting is the way to start so that they understand, number one, what's your farm map? Do you have buildings that are actually labeled, numbers, letters? Where are the water supplies? One of the biggest issues that we often have when we're actually fighting a barn fire is the fact we don't have enough water. It takes thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of water to fight the fire, and we have to have that supply. That could be ponds that are nearby. It could be from rural water systems. Whatever the case may be, does the fire department know where those sources are? Now, for your own team, you know, you really should have some sort of emergency plan. If there's a fire, what do you do? And who does what? Number one, we need to account for all the people on the farm. And then number two generally is, what are we going to do about animals? If the barn fire happens to involve the housing unit, how are we going to get them out? Where are they going to go? Again, maybe animals just out in a field would be fine until we get that situation under control. And then one final thought, if you do lose your milking parlor, what are you going to do? Where are you going to milk the cows? Having a plan as to where those animals might go if need be, and again, this would need to be updated on a regular basis because things do change, would be important should you face this type of tragedy. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.